Welcome. Okay, let's dive right into this explainer because it's a really fascinating one. We are going to explore how mental models completely shape our reality. And I mean literally, from the microscopic chemistry firing inside our brains all the way up to the macro level of massive organizational strategy.
So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at how brains actually build models. Then, why the map is not reality. After that, we'll get into second order thinking and wrap things up with systems thinking in action.
Now, right off the bat, let's just ground ourselves with a quick definition. A mental model is, well, it's a simplified explanation of how something works. Think of it exactly like a physical map you'd use for a road trip. A map doesn't show you every single pebble or pothole on the road, right? That would be totally overwhelming. Instead, it highlights the absolutely crucial information and just kind of ignores all the irrelevant details. And that's exactly what mental models do. They are our brain's go-to tool for compressing the sheer overwhelming complexity of the universe into manageable, actionable chunks.
All right, part one, how brains build models. To really understand this neural architecture, we're drawing on some brilliant research from cognitive scientist Paul Thagard, who looks at how these abstract concepts physically manifest inside our heads. Now, you might be thinking this is all just a metaphor, but here's where it gets wild. A mental model isn't just a clever figure of speech. As Thagard's work points out, it is an actual physical representation in your brain. When you hold a model of how the world works in your head, what is literally happening is a stable pattern of activation across populations of interconnected neurons. The stable firing of billions of these intricate neurons, that actually creates the physical architecture of your thoughts. It's pretty mind-blowing. And this physical wiring builds into something we've all experienced, right? That sudden aha moment. Thagard breaks this down mathematically as a kind of triple convolution. First, your brain physically combines two completely different neural representations to produce a novel one. Second, you have an emotional reaction to this new idea. It's combining your cognitive appraisal with an actual physiological perception. And then finally, the true eureka synthesis happens when the brain combines that new representation with the emotional reaction. So that amazing rush of insight you feel? Yeah, that's just your brain mathematically wiring together a brand new mental model in real time. Moving on to part two, the map is not reality. Let's zoom out to the individual level and look at a really practical framework from Farnham Street on how our internal wiring interacts with the outside world. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this stark contrast here. On the left side, we have our mental maps. These are our simplified abstractions. Think of something like a company's perfectly neat and tidy financial spreadsheet. But then on the right side is the territory. That's the messy, unpredictable, complex reality of the actual customer experience. And here's the trap. Mistaking that neat little map for the actual messy territory is exactly what leads to massive, dangerous blind spots. To make this a bit more concrete, there's this fantastic anecdote about Jeff Bezos from the early days of Amazon. He was sitting in a meeting staring at the map, and the data map showed that customer service wait times were neatly under 60 seconds. Perfect, right? But he was hearing anecdotes, the actual territory, that customers were really unhappy. So, right in the middle of this meeting, Bezos actually picks up a phone, dials the Amazon 1-800 number on speaker, and just waits. He was on hold for over 10 minutes. In one swift move, he proved that the neat data map they were looking at completely failed to match the messy reality of the territory. So the crucial takeaway here is simply this. Reality is the ultimate update. Because the territory is constantly shifting and changing, you have to actively update your mental maps based on reality. You can't just set it and forget it. And maybe even more importantly, you need to be very, very careful about the experts, pundits, or teachers who hand you these maps in the first place. You always want to question the biases of the cartographer who drew the map. All right, that brings us to section 3, second-order thinking explained. Let's talk about playing the long game. This whole concept is defined by one incredibly simple yet deeply profound question. And then what? Think about it. First-order thinking is fast, it's easy, and honestly, it's usually driven by immediate gratification or just knee-jerk reactions. But second-order thinking? That forces you to look right past that immediate result and ask, okay, and then what happens after that? Let's actually compare these two approaches. Take a super everyday action, like eating a chocolate bar. The first-order consequence is great, right? It satisfies your immediate hunger, tastes awesome. But the second and third-order consequences? Well, that's negative long-term health effects. Now, let's scale that up and consider a highly complex geopolitical example drawn from our sources. Take an action like funding moderate rebels. The first-order consequence might be an immediate regime change. Sounds like a quick win. But the second and third-order consequences can literally lead to decades of war with those exact same armed groups. So whether we're talking about your personal diet or global politics, failing to look at the subsequent consequences almost always leads to painful mistakes.
The thing is, first-order thinking is incredibly crowded. It's easy, so everyone reaches the exact same conclusions. But extraordinary performance, that comes from seeing what others simply can't. Second-order thinking genuinely separates you from the masses because it requires deliberate, complex analysis. It's all about playing the long game and understanding how your decisions interact with time and massive systems.
Which perfectly tees up our final section, Part 4, Systems Thinking in Action. Let's look at macro-level models and see what happens when we zoom out and scale these individual mental models up to massive organizations. And this brilliantly illustrates the research by Selexa Ionar on systems thinking and organizational decision-making. We see here that companies literally have to abandon simple, linear problem-solving. Why? Because modern business environments are so highly interconnected that solving one problem over here almost always creates 3 more over there. Leaders have to view their organizations as dynamic webs of relationships, not just a straight line.
So let's look at the actual organizational benefits derived from this approach. First, systems thinking integrates a holistic perspective, making absolutely sure the entire ecosystem is being considered. It also relies heavily on utilizing positive and negative feedback loops, basically knowing exactly how the system is going to react when you introduce a change. Furthermore, it uncovers interconnected risk factors. That means organizations can manage risks that cross multiple different departments rather than dealing with them in isolated little silos. Ultimately, systems thinking acts as the ultimate macro-mental model, cultivating continuous organizational learning and adaptability. Well, we have traveled all the way from the microscopic physical firing of neurons to the massive strategic planning of modern businesses. So, I want to leave you with a direct, somewhat provocative challenge. Are you actively updating your mental cartography to match the constantly changing territory of your life? Remember, your models are only as good as their connection to actual reality. Keep asking yourself, and then what? And keep learning. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.